One of my editors stopped me in the hall one day and said, "We have a berth on a ship that's going to an island in the middle of the Pacific where some people think Amelia Earhart died. Do you want to go and cover the expedition?" And I said yes before I had any idea really where I was going and really what the story was. But it turned out to be a great adventure and led to the book that I've just published. Lost, Amelia Earhart's 3 Mysterious Deaths and 1 Extraordinary Life.
Welcome back to the Take a Chance on You podcast, hosted by me, Alexandra Forsyth. I'm so excited today to be passing the mic to Rachel Hartigan, who is a former journalist currently based in the US, having experience reporting across world news, National Geographic, and she is a recent author. Rachel, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Like I said, you're joining us from the US, and shortly before the podcast, I said to Rachel, I've been having quite a few US-based guests on, which is always quite thrilling because you're across the pond and the stories that you share. So do you want to give the listeners a little bit of an introduction to who you are and what you're up to?
Sure. As Alex said, I am a journalist. I've been a journalist for almost 30 years, and sort of adapting as journalism has changed and covering a lot of different things. My first job was actually at a cowboy magazine in Carson City, Nevada, which still exists, amazingly. But I've gone from covering education to working with a magazine that was tied to the Library of Congress. So basically covered everything since that holds every book that has ever been published in the U.S. Worked for U.S. News and World Report covering education. Over here, U.S. News is a big deal because it does the college rankings. So I was working on that for quite a while. And then got what I thought was my dream job. So I was writing book reviews, editing book reviews, had a whole room full of books I could choose from to take home. It was pretty great, but it's gone through ups and downs over the last 2 years. So I ended up getting laid off there. Worked for a bit of time for academic association, and then got what actually turned out to be my dream job, which was a job at National Geographic. Some old colleagues were working there, and they said, "We need somebody who can write and edit well." And this was definitely out of my comfort zone because National Geographic travels everywhere, covers everything, and I had been more of a desk journalist. I mean, I'd gone on reporting trips and everything, but I wasn't chasing lions or anything like that. So I got there and I knew I was out of my comfort zone. So I wrote myself a little Post-it that said, "Say yes to everything." And that's pretty much what I did when I got there, which for a long time just meant, writing longer stories than I was used to. But the big sort of break for me came when one of my editors stopped me in the hall one day and said, "We have a berth on a ship that's going to an island in the middle of the Pacific where some people think Amelia Earhart died. Do you want to go and cover the expedition?" And I said yes before I had any idea really where I was going and really what the story was. But it turned out to be a great adventure and led to the book that I've just published.
An amazing story. And I really love what you mentioned about going outside of your comfort zone, writing that Post-it note, say yes to everything, because opportunities are all around us if we remain open. So just by doing that, you're affirming to yourself, I belong here.
Yeah. Well, it really made a difference. It gave me sort of cut short the self-doubt because I said, well, I'll have to try it and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
And, mostly it worked out well.
It's the main thing, trying, giving it a go. I always say I don't want to live with regrets ever in life, even if it doesn't work out, even if you do something, a business venture or maybe writing a book or starting a podcast or doing something creative and you find that it doesn't work the way you want, you can always pivot and go and do something else.
Right.
So,
And you don't really know what things will lead to. Whether it works out or not, it might lead to something else. The
Well,
story led to a book. Yeah.
this is what I always say. I'm very tunnel vision. So if I
Hmm.
have a destination in mind, depending on what I'm doing, that's all I can think about. But actually, like you say, what if it leads on to another pathway that you hadn't fully envisioned yet, but it turns
Hmm.
out to be where you're meant to be?
Yeah. Yeah.
But talk to me a little bit about the book.
The book is called Lost, Amelia
Okay.
Earhart's Three Mysterious Deaths and One Extraordinary Life. It came out of the expedition that I went on. And as I said, this was an expedition to this island in the middle of the ocean called Nicaragua, where some people think that Amelia Earhart landed. She was on, in 1937, she was on a round the world flight. And obviously, it wasn't all just one go. She was stopping place to place and she was almost done. She'd flown east from California along the equator, and her last stop was in New Guinea. And then she was flying from New Guinea to this island in Howland called Howland, where basically all it was three people were living there, and there were a couple of new runways. There was a ship waiting for her, and she and her navigator were going to make this 20-hour flight, land on the island, refuel, and then fly on to Hawaii. But they never showed up on the island. And so since then, there's been all these theories about what happened to her. Did she run out of gas and crashed into the ocean? Did she crash and was she somehow captured by the Japanese and executed? Or did she end up flying south, land on this island called Nicaragua, and, stuck there because she didn't have enough gas and die a castaway? So when I went on the expedition, I'd never even been on a cruise ship before. So, and this was a 5-day sail from Fiji. So I didn't really know what that would be like and what it would be like to be out in the middle of the ocean and not see anything except for water. I found out that I get very seasick, and that wasn't very fun. But I also found out that I could cover a story that was sort of ongoing, interview all the people on the expedition, deal with all the heat, deal with the crabs that were like the size of dinner plates, just experience all these things. And we did not find Amelia Earhart when we went to that island, but I went back again
Spoiler
2 years.
alert.
I know, spoiler alert. We're still looking. Went again with another expedition that was looking in the waters around the island. And this was with Robert Ballard, who was the one who found the Titanic. So that was a different kind of experience because it was a research vessel with all this high tech. And when I came back from that, I got an email just out of the blue from an agent saying, I've been reading your stories. I think this would make a great book. And I hadn't really thought about doing a book because, we hadn't found her. She was still missing. So what would the book say? So I had to do a lot of thinking about that. But then I finally realized a way that I could blend Amelia Earhart's biography with the story of all these different theories and turn it into kind of a compelling story that would answer a lot of questions for readers who occasionally, they'll see some story saying so and so is going to look for Earhart on this island or wherever and wonder, well, why do they think that? Why are we still looking for her? And it ended up, I've always wanted to write a book, and it ended up just being such a rewarding experience that I never would have had if I hadn't said yes to that first request.
I think for anybody listening, maybe who wants to also venture down the author pathway, what would you recommend in terms of what did the timeline look like for you in the process? Is there anything you think that listeners should know in that regard?
Well, the timeline was tricky, and I think it's important to know that writing a book is really hard. Organizing all the information is really hard. It was really hard for me to figure out how long everything would take. One issue that came up for me that I think it depends on your listeners what their day job is, basically. My day job was writing and editing, and then I was trying, you know, in the early mornings, in the evenings, and on the weekends to be doing the same thing. And basically, my brain just maxed out at some point. I
Yeah.
was just thinking, I ran out of words. So I ended up leaving my job because this book was my project and for me, and I really wanted to get that done. The thing I would say to people who are thinking about it is just it's hard and you should expect it to be hard, and that you just have to keep going at it.
Keep going at it because it's don't expect to write the book and be published in the same year. It
Oh,
takes a
no.
couple of years, 2, 3
Mhm.
really, because I mean, for yourself, obviously in such a fortunate position in terms of an agent coming to you, if
Mhm.
that's not the case, you will be responsible for having to go out there and pitch your book. I know that there are some festivals now you can attend where you actually do pitch your ideas to agents. There are a few in the
Mhm.
US actually, and I
Yeah.
think there are a few here in London as well. We have book fairs all year round where you can go and
Mhm.
meet some of the debut authors and the agents representing them. But yeah, it's a hard gig for sure. And I think depending on what your day job is, like you say, maybe don't lose that just yet whilst you're
Right.
writing.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is very few people make money or make a profit on
Yeah.
writing a book, so you have to do it because you really find the process rewarding, which I do. I mean, I love to write, I love to learn things, I love to do research. So that was, in a way, enough for me. I mean, obviously, I would like to make some money on it, but it's
Gotta
just
pay
not it's
rent.
not the fast way to get rich,
I
for
was
sure.
I was saying to a friend yesterday, we both agreed it sometimes just doing the hard task, it's to pay rent, and then what happens later on is always a benefit. But going back to kind of maxing out in terms of the words, obviously you mentioned it was quite exhausting. Again, thinking about were there any remedies to that for you? I mean, what comes to mind is kind of well-being, burnout, making sure we don't get there. It's a hot topic and tend to cover it quite a lot on the podcast. But do
Yeah.
you have any processes again that you went through?
Well, I mean, I did a drastic remedy. I mean, I left my job. I had some other I had a couple deaths in the family that happened along the same time. So that was why I was extremely burnt out.
Yeah,
But one thing that helped me in a way was setting up a routine, which I often find very challenging. And I didn't think of working on this as an 8-hour day or a more than that hour day, because I think it's really hard to do that creative work that intensely for that long. So building in breaks, I mean, I'm lucky I have a dog who needs to be walked. So I have to go outside. I have to get fresh air and sun on my face. I found that, making sure you get enough sleep, go to bed at the same time every night, taking care of all these things that feel self-indulgent, but actually build up your resilience, I think helped a lot. And also just remembering why I was doing it. It helped. I was working on, I mean, this book took a long time, and I was working on it during the pandemic, and knowing that this was my project, that it wasn't something I was doing for another company. It was really how I wanted it to be. And that felt very powerful and meaningful to me, because then I got a little bit less self-conscious about what it looked like.
I love that. And you're doing it for yourself and for the
Hmm.
readers. You want them to read a compelling story.
Hmm.
Ultimately, I'm the same with the podcast. It comes from a place of love and passion over anything else. So you often find those are the most successful projects you'll ever work on, regardless of how they
Hmm.
turn out, because you go into it with such authentic intentions. And
Hmm.
I've always said to myself with the podcast, it's always worked out. There's always been this secret person that's opened another door for me when I've not been looking. I always
Hmm.
find it's quite coincidental how that happens. And I'm sure you're the same with the book.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you had come across, I mean, there was one guy I interviewed, and I was like, oh, should I interview him or not? He ended up sending me all these interviews that another um, man who had just died had recorded, of all these people who had actually been involved with Earhart, had met her, had been on the ship that was waiting for her. So I had this treasure trove that I never expected to get, just because this one man was just very generous with his sources. And,
It's
I didn't even know to
amazing.
look for it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's finding people like that. And what's the feedback been like from all of the people that you interviewed? They've enjoyed reading it?
Yeah, I mean, they've liked it. I've gotten a lot of great feedback just from regular readers, which in a way is more important to me, because I really was aiming at people who were not specialists in Earhart and not wedded to one specific theory. So some of the people who are really true believers in their theory aren't that thrilled with my book just because I don't advocate for one specific theory. So they, I think, are a little disappointed in that. But it seems to be doing well. And it's very exciting after working on something which, I mean, actually ended up being 7 years on and off and, by myself at my desk. And then now it's
Yeah.
in the public. It's pretty wild.
I mean, that's almost a decade
I
of
know.
time spent
Yeah,
writing a book. I mean, such dedication and commitment. So, again, to any listeners who are thinking about going down that pathway, longevity is needed because it's not a start writing and then publish in the same year,
right,
definitely a couple of years, if not more. But it's a
right.
fantastic journey that you've been on. Going right back to the beginning, your love of editing, where do you think that's come from?
I think it comes from, I mean, I've just always loved reading and loved words and loved learning about things and not in a specific way. I could never be an academic and just focus on one thing. So it's just sort of a hunger and a curiosity to know about the world, to know, especially to know about other people and how they got to where they got to and why they do what they do. Real people now and historical people as well. How did someone like Amelia Earhart live in her time and decide that she was not going to be a stay at home mom like everybody else of her generation, but she was going to actually fly? How do you get to that point? I find that fascinating. And that's a lot of what I would write about when I was at National Geographic and other places is why does
Mm.
this scientist do something this way? Why does this environmentalist really think there should be buffalo free on the plains? It's just really fun. And I imagine you get that too, talking to lots of people.
Absolutely. I resonate with everything you say. It's curiosity. I'm so curious about people. I mean,
Hmm.
sometimes when I'm, for example, in London, I don't wear headphones when I'm walking around anymore. I really
Ah,
love to take in my environment. I'm walking
hmm.
down the street and I'm hearing 10 or 15 different conversations just all
Yeah.
flying about, but they're so different to each other, and I'm absorbing all of that information. The
Hmm.
same when I'm speaking to people on podcast and other things that I do. Yeah, it's fascinating. Going back to what you said, a lifelong passion of learning, just
Hmm.
always wanting to. I mean, if we think about what's taking place currently in the world, really, and just the economy and socially, I find that quite
Hmm.
fascinating to see where we'll
Hmm.
be in years to come. And you touch briefly on technology as well in the book. Maybe not in
Hmm.
terms of kind of the current trends and digital transformation, but
Hmm.
you touch on quite a few different themes as well as Hollywood movies,
Hmm.
female daredevil pilots.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of different
Yeah.
arcs there.
Yeah. And one thing I was really interested in as I was learning about Earhart and also learning about the theories is just how they're connected to these seemingly unconnected big historical trends. Amelia Earhart was lucky to be born at a time where all this new technology was developing and she was a very adventurous person so she could take advantage of it. But then, some of the theories about her are more tied to like the Japan theory that she was captured by the Japanese. That's really tied to colonialism and to aggression between Japan and the US and these big worldwide trends that lead to world wars. And it also involves this one single person and the stories we tell about her. And I just find all those connections fascinating. And I mean, it plays out now too. You think, well, why are people still interested in her? And there was just this like little dust up on social media, which I mean, social media, whatever, but people who had thought that had gotten the idea that the US government had not responded to her distress signals. And they're tying it to people not responding to Jeffrey Epstein's victims' signals, not believing women. And in that
Mm.
case, it's not actually true in the Earhart case, but it's interesting that what's going on now really reflects how we look at something that happened in the past.
So yeah, it's really interesting. They might not be connected, but because of similarities in the way they're
Mhm.
portrayed, people then try and put two and two together. Yeah, it happens more often than not, definitely
Mhm.
in the
Mhm.
news. And I always find there's such disparity between what they actually tell us and what happened. What I like to do with the guests is let the listeners in on maybe something they don't necessarily know about you. I know that some of my
Mhm.
guests before have spoken about their early years and what drives them, I guess, school or university, and
Mhm.
I think for you, maybe previous learning during your younger years, did anything inform kind of the Rachel that you are today?
So, I don't know. I do, I grew up in Reno, Nevada, which is in Nevada for a long time was the only state with gambling. It's basically a big old desert. It's not much going on there beyond gambling. But I grew up, and just from a very young age, I did not buy that women were in any way inferior to men. And I don't know where that came from. I remember getting in arguments with the boy next door. And so I think that has that sense that people are really more about what they do than what their identity is, like, has really driven me and just been made me very interested in people and how they've got to do what they do. That's just been just a lifelong interest. And of course, I read all the time. We went to a Shakespeare festival. That was like our holiday every summer. So that was, of course, words and stories. And um, yeah, that's just always been the thing that keeps me going and gets me excited.
And in terms of the book, I know that you mentioned in the last chapter that kind of unravels a little bit more towards your personal journey. Any snippets that you can give the listeners? And I'm hoping that some of the listeners will go and read the
Yeah.
book.
I mean, I talk in the last chapter in the book a little bit about Earhart's family and how she was a real person who disappeared, who never came home. And they grieved her but have not in a way been left in peace to grieve. And that really resonated with me. And maybe it wouldn't have a few years ago, but it did, because in the process of the book, several people in my family, quite a few people in my family actually died from, different reasons, mostly old age, but also there was a surprise kind of violent death. And that really made me think about grief and how we think about the people who have gone and how we manage that grief. And I really wanted to bring home that she was a real person. She's not just an object to go looking for. She's not just a symbol of feminism. She was a person who, uh, who had her faults, who loved people and annoyed people and all the things that we do. And I really wanted to bring that home to readers. That was really important to me. And I hope I did a little bit.
I think that's a fantastic remark to make. These are people that when we read stories, like I say, in the news or in books, they are real people, they have real lives, family.
Hmm.
Grief is such an interesting word. I think it comes in many forms. And
Hmm.
I don't think it's spoken about enough. And I spoke about it on the podcast not too long ago. Grief sometimes for ourselves as we grow older and we go through
Hmm.
different life journeys, we don't spend enough time grieving who we once were. And sometimes it can
Hmm.
be, there's also joy in that and
Yeah.
happiness because you're moving
Hmm.
on and you're accepting
Hmm.
yourself for who you are. But then there's always that underlying grief that you do have to overcome.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's really true. Yeah.
One of my questions for you is another book. What does the future hold?
Oh.
26, we're only in quarter two.
I am thinking about another book that might be a little bit different, but in the same era.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at a place where a bunch of artists and like photographers and writers and also business people all gathered in the same building in San Francisco and how they all influenced each other. But I'm still just looking into that.
Thing.
Yeah, and just doing some other. I'll also be writing a sort of a monthly article for National Geographic's website on other lost explorers. So if that is something that you can't get enough of, I'll be there
I'm
at
quite
Nat Geo.
fascinated. I'm quite fascinated by the subject of lost explorers. Is there anybody else that comes to mind for you? Anyone that you researched alongside?
Well, there's John Franklin, who, he was lost for a while, or people didn't know why that whole expedition died, and they've since found the ship. Oh, what's the man's name who disappeared in the Amazon looking for, the book was The Lost City of Z.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, these people just keep going back and back to find things. That's another really fascinating mindset, like why these people don't give up.
There's another story which, again, relating to a plane that went missing.
There was that Malaysian flight that
I think that's the one. Yeah, that's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah. Bizarre.
Yeah, it's just like you just don't think people can disappear.
No, because then it kind of messes with, I don't know, life, I guess, and what we have come to see it as. It's been so lovely to have you on the podcast today. That's Rachel, who her debut book has recently come out, and you can go and purchase it online. Drop Rachel a message if you'd like to learn a little bit more about what she's up to at National Geographic and potentially writing her second book. So she's in the research phase currently. And I will speak to you all very, very soon. Bye.
Bye.